Hey, this is Alpha. Today I want to bring you up to speed on how to build effective AI agents. I want to start this video by giving you the context and then share with you how you can do so very easily just by taking my source code, copying it, and using it for yourself. So last month, Anthropic released a blog post in which they defined the industry best practices on how to build or develop AI agents. They start the discussion by distinguishing between workflows and agents. They describe when you should and when you should not use them. They talk about some of the frameworks that are available for developers in the space. And then they get to the juice. And the juice is there are at least 5 or 6 best practices that they have defined. And these workflows and agent patterns are able to give you the most value possible while implementing the industry practices. So in here we have the first one being Augmented Large Language Model. This is what I will focus on for this video. I will give you an example on how you can use it today using the Pedantic AI Framework. If you haven't heard, Pedantic AI is a new framework that has been released by the Pedantic team, and their goal is to make it less painful to build AI agents for production. Now, Pedantic has a great starting point because they already have solved type safety, creating production-ready applications. Now they're simply extending that into generative AI or agentic space, which is what I've been part of for the past year. So if we jump back into the blog post, they talk about many other workflows, including prompt chaining, routing, parallelization. But for this video, I'll focus on the first one, and I'll also create other videos. So if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to my channel and you will see more videos as I share them. The first one here is what you would consider to be one of the most common patterns, where you have a large language model in the middle, you have user texting or sending a prompt to that language model. The language model is responding, and behind the scenes it's using retrieval, sometimes referred to as RAG, using tools or making calls thanks to functions, and using memory, meaning keeping track of records as the conversational experience flows. And mind you, they were one of the leaders of this space. They've defined what's called an MCP. And if you want to learn more on how you can use this open source structure, feel free to check out one of my videos where I do a deep dive on how MCP can be used to implement this. But for the purpose of this video, I'll focus my time on getting you up to speed on how you can implement the Augmented Large Language Model workflow using the Pedantic AI Framework. So before I jump into that, the Anthropic team did share several of these patterns already. So if you are anxious for my upcoming videos and you're not able to wait, feel free to look at the Anthropic cookbook, and you will see different examples of different workflows as Jupyter notebooks here. So there's 3, and there's also utility 5. So this is a great way to get started if you're not willing to wait for my upcoming videos on how you can do the same using Pedantic AI, CrewAI, and other frameworks. So if I jump into what I want to focus this video on is my public repository under the MIT license. If you want to follow along, feel free to go to GitHub, search for my name. I go by Alpha to make it simpler, but if you search for building effective agents, you will see that. In case you haven't been up to date on AI agents, definitely check out another resource of mine called Awesome AI Agents. There's definitely a small pun there. They are definitely awesome in that they are able to automate most of workflows that you can envision, and even those that you can't. Look at this handsome guy here, and you see essentially different projects that are in the space, including libraries, frameworks, and tools. So definitely check it out if you haven't done so already. And coming back here for this repository, which I launched today, if you jump into the first workflow, you'll see that I have a Pedantic AI agents folder. This is the first implementation. As I mentioned, I'll add more frameworks and libraries, and this will make it easier for you to get started. And if I just zoom out for a second, you will see that here we have what you've seen before: user request, chats with an agent. But this is a slightly more details here. I'll mention this, and of course you can jump into the code to see the implementation. But the agent is used to define the system prompt, or sometimes referred to as developer prompt. It's able to define structured output schema. It's able to call tools with function calls. And then the workflow essentially is nothing more than 4 components here for Pedantic AI. Tool use, as I'll show you for this example. I'll focus my time on the sales use case of a sales agent performing outreach on X, and defining dependencies or configuration files necessary for that sales outreach. The language model here, that could be any provider like OpenAI, Anthropic, but it can be any model as well, like GPT-4o or GPT 3.5, or even the new GPT-01 preview model, which is currently available in their API. You've got Anthropic, so it's Claude 3.5, Sonnet, Gemini, Flash 2.0, experimental, etc. And so with each one of these components, you're doing a tool call, you're doing retrieval on that tool based on parameters, you're injecting the configuration files, pushing that back to the agent, you're defining the provider, and then you're sending messages to that provider through, let's say, a text prompt, and you're getting back a response. And that response can be either through a traditional string response, or it can be through a function call, or it can be a structured output. Pedantic is great for that, as I mentioned before. And this is the last piece where you have a validation thanks to Pedantic. So key competitive advantage that Pedantic has, thanks to their reliance on Pedantic, is that they're able to enforce structure on every response. This is highly critical for production applications. So if you're not using Pedantic for your Pythonic ways or Pythonic workflows, definitely check that out. And of course, all of that is encapsulated within this Pedantic AI framework. You simply define the right-hand piece here, and then once the agent is confident that it's executed the following, it's able to respond to the user. So all the source code here you'll find inside. I'll just jump into the source and show you what that looks like. These are some of the best practices that I've been developing over the past year as I've been developing agents for client work, as well as my AI experience over the past decade using language models and everything else in between. Agents folder simply defines all the agents necessary for this execution. You've got the base agent, which is just the core Pedantic AI wrapper, and you've got the sales agent, which is the one that is actually performing the work. For sales outreach on X, you've got clients, or essentially the equivalent of a server you're connecting somewhere, in this case a database, to store data about the prospect or lead. Models are synonymous with schema. This is a terminology from the database circle, so this is where you define the structure of the database that you're dealing with. And this is not to be confused with a language model. That's different. This is a schema model. Here we have a tool where you're defining all the tools that the agent has access to, in this case X or Twitter. I'll give you an example just of that sales use case, and I'll run the application as well. So if I go back into the code here and I open up my terminal, I'm just going to run the command to be able to execute this. So let me just jump into the appropriate folder, and then we can execute that command. one more, I believe. Let me just double check. Agents, source. That's right, so we just need to make sure we are referencing the right file. One second here. Oh, that's correct, because we created a new folder, so let's just make sure we're in the right folder. And we can execute that file. Okay, so I'm seeing an error here, but by the time you watch this video, this should be fixed. It's just a relative error. I was doing some last minute changes here, but to come back to the source code, you'll be able to run the agent, and what the agent is going to do for you is it's going to take what would be considered a typical sales workflow. A salesperson or a sales agent would be required to find leads and then perform outreach for those leads. In this case, we're using X to find leads. So the first tool we're making a call to is be able to find the lead and based on the ideal customer profile. And essentially we are doing a certain essentially retrieval or lookup on X. We're storing information about that lead, including their bio, their handle, how many followers they have, how close they are to matching the ideal profile, what message they sent, and if they replied. This is going to be important because if they replied, we're gonna find that response and the sales agent will stop. This is the extent of this specific demo. The sales agent with Pedantic AI will stop when there is any response from the outreach that it performs. And at this point, of course, a human agent can jump in and continue that workflow. And lastly, we just store that data. So first step is the agent is performing prospecting. Second stage is the agent is performing outreach. In this case, it's essentially able to create a record on the database, and it's able to send that message to the prospect. So we keep track of who the lead is, and we keep track of every message we send to them. This is the database layer here, where we're storing the data into a data store, in this case, the database we're using here. And the last piece I'll mention here is that we have one more tool. So 3 tools in total for this specific workflow. We're checking the response from X to see if there's any new messages that the agent has received. If there is a new message, we start that message, and we basically update that lead to the fact that they've replied to us. This is critical because at this point the human agent jumps in. So step 1, the agent performs the outreach on X by finding the lead, sending the message, checking the response. 3 tools used by this Pedantic AI framework. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're using validation, and of course we can ensure validation through Pedantic. The other pieces here are quite simple, but by the time you watch this may change, and keep that in mind. This is just a starting point to get started very quickly. Here we have database connection. In this case, we're using in-memory data store, but I do want to extend this to other database layers, including Postgres, libSQL. So perhaps I extend it to use Supabase or Terso. If you think that's of value, please let me know in the description, in the comments rather, and I will keep that in mind as I create these videos and update the source code for this free resource. I jump back into the models. These are the schema models, as I mentioned. Perhaps I'll change that naming here to make it more concrete, and perhaps I'll create another folder for language models. In this case, the schema for the record of the lead itself, and the schema for the record of the message that we send to them. This is just for record keeping. This is how we know if the user has replied, and this is how the human agent knows how to follow up, because they see the previous message that was sent by the sales agent. If I go back into just one more component here, it's the tool itself, and that tool is essentially, as I mentioned before, a series of 3 tools: searching in here, sending messages, and checking inbox. Now, this is all mock data, but by the time you watch this, perhaps this will use real data. For the purpose of this video, I wanted to keep it concise and to the point. But here, if we are to use real Twitter API, that's possible. You'll need to pay to access their Twitter API, since Elon had changed their developer onboarding workflows. And then you have the sending of those messages. Of course, if you have access to the API, you're able to find leads based on profile data, for example, and you're able to send messages to them. If you're not able to use the Twitter API, you'll need to use an unofficial Twitter API, or just have an agent control your own Twitter account so that you are able to do these 2 steps. But to keep it compliant, I will mention that I recommend you start with the Twitter API and then see the limitations and its abilities before you consider any other option here. For simplicity, also you have checking process here as well. So whenever the message comes in, we're able to store that message on a database if it does arrive, and then able to parse it later down the workflow. The last piece I'll mention here is just the main model itself, which is a great overview of how this looks like. You have essentially the execution of this. You have an agent that's able to ask you a system prompt, or user prompt rather. That agent receives a user prompt. In this case, I want to find and message leads for a specific role. In this case, there's the role of a CEO in the US, and in this case the agent will find 3 leads. So these are some of the parameters that you can use to be able to quickly use the sales agent. And beyond that, the agent is just executing the workflow in a synchronous manner. So the result of the first sales agent is now being able to pass the context of the lead list, and then once it has the context, it has the handles, it's now as a new system prompt. It's able to essentially perform outreach for that lead. So once it finds the lead, it's able to craft a message. In this case, it's quite simple, but of course we can use language model here like OpenAI that makes it more dynamic based on profile details. For example, you're able to say, "Hi, Tom," for example, "we have a great tip for CEOs in United States. Interested?" This is a simple template, of course, but this can be much more complex. And last piece here is in a synchronous manner as before. We're essentially chaining prompts. This is a typical prompt chaining from the sales agent, performing one tool here called find leads. The sales agent performs another tool here called outreach lead, and lastly, it's able to check with a 3rd tool called check response. Now, tools are one of the best practices of extending agents and making them more powerful, leveling them up, as I've mentioned before. So I highly recommend you offload most of the logic into the tool itself and let the agent handle context only. So just pass context from one part of the workflow to another, as we've seen here. And of course, we kind of pipe all that together. In the end, we have kind of the best case scenario from this workflow, where somebody on X replies to our sales agent, and now you or a sales agent, another sales agent can jump in, whether that's another Pedantic AI agent or a human agent. So that choice is up to you. For the brevity of this video, I'll keep it at this level. So if you want to see how you can implement your own augmented large language model using Pedantic AI, definitely go to my free resource, click code, click download zip, or you can simply copy this URL, run git clone command, paste that into your computer, and on your terminal you'll be able to copy this, jump into the right folder, and now you have a working example of how you can build your own augmented large language model. And feel free to change the files, feel free to change the tools. You have full ability to do so because this is under the MIT license. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in comment below, or open up issues, perhaps even make pull requests if you are interested to extend the work that I've done here. And if you have any questions about what I've showed you, I'm more than able to answer them. If you subscribe, you'll be able to see me create other videos, and the videos that will show you how you can implement all of these workflows one at a time. So in this case, prompt chaining is the one that I briefly mentioned here, but you will see that an example of that. So perhaps you watch another video, or if you revisit this link, you'll be able to see an updated version, and you will see folders here. You'll see the appropriate source code for that execution. If you have any questions about what I've showed you, definitely reach out to me. I'm more than able to help you implement not only what I showed you here in the source code, but also I'm able to help you to implement effective agents in your workflows and in your brand. I look forward to creating more content like this. I'll see you next time.